Like I say, this is me, Dave Roberts. We've got 20 minutes past 8, and I'm really pleased to say that my good friend, my Mr. Musical Historian, Mr. Man who knows everything there is about music, Mr. Derek Shelmerdine's on the other side of the desk. Derek, good evening, and welcome to Meridian once again.
It's great to be back. I'm not quite sure about everything, but it's brilliant to be back again.
And you know enough. That's the good thing. Oh dear, everything's going so high tonight. Tonight we're going to talk about the Crawdaddy Club.
The Crawdaddy Club,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, two things, both iconic in their way. I mean, the Crawdaddy Club was the trailblazing club in the first half of the 60s for the London R&B scene. Absolutely amazing. And also one of the real unsung heroes of the British R&B scene, well, more than just the R&B scene, basically. Giorgio Gomelsky, who, well, as we see as we're going through, had a major, not just influence, but was a driving force that really helped to establish R&B in the London area. I mean, the guy was actually born in Georgia, Russia, on the 28th of February, 1934. But his family moved to Switzerland 10 years later, and he was always into music, got into jazz very early, and he played the drums, which in my books is always an extremely fine sort of a chap.
Nothing wrong with a drummer.
Nothing wrong at all with the drums, especially
except they're completely insane, most of them.
Well, that's very true. They're usually the ones that go first, and alcohol's very often involved. But by the time we get to 1953, so the guy's not yet 20, he'd organised the first Zurich jazz festival called the Zurifest, and that apparently is still going to this day. But a couple of years later, around 55, he came to London. The guy was a filmmaker, and he was really, really into his jazz. And he loved the British jazz scene. He came over and he filmed people like Chris Barber, Johnny Dankworth. And to put this into context, 1955, this is where British rock and roll was, essentially with the trad jazz bands. Because Chris Barber's they had breakout groups, breakout skiffle groups. So when the jazz musicians actually took a break, went off to the bar, then 3 or 4 of them would pick up their skiffle instruments, and that was Lonnie Donegan was his skiffle interlude band. Yeah. And I mean, it was through that and with Barber that he recorded Rock On and Line. So yeah. I mean, that really is, this is the heart of British rock and roll, and Gomelsky is there, involved with it. And Gomelsky met a guy called Harry Pendleton. And Harry Pendleton was the guy who, on the 19th of April, 1958, actually opened the Marquee Club, and it was in Oxford Street then. And to put it into context, and it opened as a jazz club, and the Cavern had opened on the January 16, 57. And the Eel Pie Island essentially became, well, it had its grand gala opening night on the 9th of February 1957. So all 3 of those venues, Cavern, Eel Pie and the Marquee, all started as trad jazz clubs. And what happened was that Gomelsky was never a big fan of trad jazz, which is basically the British take on New Orleans Dixieland jazz. And he went around, he found sort of dying venues and put on R&B nights. And eventually, his mate, Harry Pendleton, thought he was treading on his toes. So Gomelsky decided that he could prove his point that he wasn't by moving way out of central London all the way to Richmond, which is the end of the district line.
Oh, well, yes.
So, I mean, that is out there, almost Watford away, I guess. And he had a mate who ran the Station Hotel in at Richmond, and he decided that he'd put on an R&B night, and initially it was just Sunday nights, and it became very, very popular. He called it, this is the end of 62, when he opened the Crawdaddy. He named the club after Bo Diddley's Doing the Crawdaddy, which was taken off Bo Diddley's 1961 album, Bo Diddley the Gunslinger. And its first resident band was Dave Hunt's R&B band. And that particular band included Ray Davis, the guy who went on to found the Kinks, and also an occasional Charlie Watts, the guy who became the Stones drummer So, you know, I mean, the whole thing, the whole scene, when you delve into all this, the whole scene becomes very incestuous, and often the same sort of names are popping up on a very, very regular basis. Early on, Gomelsky had met Brian Jones and the early Rolling Stones stuff, and he was very keen for the Rolling Stones to join them. So when Dave Hunt was effectively unable to make the residency for some reason, he invited the Stones, and the Stones became the following resident band at the Crawdaddy, and Giorgio Gomelsky, managed them at that time. He never had anything written. He never had a formal contract with him.
When the Stones were on, were they, you know, essentially a covers band?
Covers in the sense of they would, like all the R&B British R&B groups in the early 60s, most of what they did were covers. I mean, they went on, like the Beatles, to become songwriting bands.
Yeah.
But most of them, in the beginning, they might have had their odd song, but essentially they were R&B covers bands, and that was what they were playing. Some of those covers were contemporaneous, basically. They were pretty much current with the covers, but some of them, like Louis Jordan and the like, some of these covers go way back, well beyond that, to the early blues days. But very much British R&B started very much in the covers area. And then what happened was that, the Beatles came along and met the Stones for the first time at the Crawdaddy, and Andrew Lou Oldham also got to hear about them, and he came down and saw them at the Crawdaddy.
Do you think the Crawdaddy was the kind of southern version of the Cavern Club?
Oh, very much so, I think.
Yeah, I
think so. I think that certainly the Crawdaddy and the Marquee were the two. The Marquee was right in the centre of town, and that has an illustrious history as well. But yeah, I mean, the Crawdaddy is iconic. I mean, there aren't too many. It's a word that's bandied round, but there aren't too many people or things that should have that name. But Robert Johnson, I think, justifies it, and certainly the Crawdaddy Club. When you think that its second resident band was the Rolling Stones, its third resident band was the Yardbirds.
Not a bad pedigree, really, is it?
Well, yeah. I mean, and just about anybody and everybody at that time played there. I mean, it must have been I'm from the other end of the country, so the Cavern was more my stomping ground, as it were.
And I'm too young. I'm sorry, I'm just too young. I was around in '63, but no, I certainly wasn't going to clubs in '63.
Well, what happened was it was at the station. He opened it at the Station Hotel, and which is opposite. The hotel is still there, the pub is still there, the restaurant is still there, and it's right opposite the tube station. So when you get to the end of the District line in Richmond, you would just tumble out and into the club. So that would have been very handy. But what happened? They had a license for about fire license for about 500 people, and the membership had grown to a couple of thousand. And there was a famous article, I think it was in the NME. That said, nights were getting a bit rowdy, basically. And Ian Coop, who owned the pub, took a very dim view of this. As it was quite a puritanical time in some ways, the early 60s. And they told Mr. Gomelsky that he needed to retire, regroup, and find himself another club. And that's when he went over and moved lock, stock and barrel to Richmond Athletic Ground. So it was an interesting time. But I thought it might be interesting for the first song to think about one of the covers that was very popular. It gave Dave Clark his first hit, and it gave Brian Poole his first number one. But the original version is 1962 track called "Do You Love Me?"
And this, of course, is
by the Contours.
The Contours.
You broke my heart, 'cause I couldn't dance. You didn't even want me around. And now I'm back to let you know I can really shake 'em down.
the contours there, and the original version of... You can tell I wasn't used to the original version. I had no idea that it was going to fade out like that and then just cut back in again. I'm used to the. See, that's my age showing. You see, I'm used to the more the slightly modern versions.
What a great version! But that was very much the time now. They've moved to Richmond Athletic Ground. And at that particular opening night, I mean, the Stones topped the bill and the Yardbirds were on the bill. And it's round about this time that the Stones had their first single out, Come On, and they were becoming unbelievably popular, certainly locally. And Come On took them to national fame. So they really, I won't say they outgrew it, but basically, it was time for them to move on. And the Yardbirds became the new resident band, but this time, Giorgio Gomelsky managed them as well. But this time, he had the fortitude to have a contract with them, and they started their residency in about September '63. And what's interesting and not so well known is that around the same sort of time, the Yardbirds, I saw a listing that showed them appearing at the Crawdaddy in Croydon on the 19th of October. 1963. So Giorgio Gomelsky decided that a Crawdaddy in Richmond, in West London, and a Crawdaddy in Croydon would be a really good idea. And it was around this sort of time that Topham, their original guitarist, moved on, because he was only about 16 years old.
Yeah.
And his mum and dad didn't particularly want him to they wanted him to get an education, to get a proper job. And he's obviously carried on, and the guys...
I think I've mentioned this before. We've actually had his daughter in the studio here, Lainey Kaleido. A great singer, really good singer.
Yeah, superb. And I think, Mike, you're there. You were saying when we were chatting earlier that he actually has played at the Crawdaddy Club since you reopened it.
Can you hear us, Mike?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I can hear you. Indeed, Top came and I asked him to come along. We did a night of tribute to Giorgio, and I asked Top if he would come along. He had been before. I asked him as a guest. Came over for a couple of beers. I had lunch with him, and I decided that it would be good actually to do a tribute to Giorgio. And Top very kindly came along. He made a little speech, and he stayed on all evening, played with the band. He's a very, very accomplished guitarist. He sings too. He's quite a talented individual. It doesn't just like a lot of those guys in that era. It wasn't just music, but they're very much into art. He's a very talented artist. Many of those guys that got into music came from art schools. It's like the Beatles themselves, which is some of the Beatles originated from an art school. But yeah, so Top, came along, very, very nice guy. Very interesting. He spoke very, very highly of Giorgio. Interestingly, he said he was, as Derek mentioned, he was only 15 at the time, and so he couldn't actually sign the deal to stay on with the Yardbirds. But said Giorgio really looked after him and treated him like a son. Introduced him to some of these great American black blues singers who were over here. So that's a very interesting. Top is he's still around making music every now and then.
Absolutely. Interesting to ponder on where Eric Clapton's career might be now, because he replaced Topham around the sort of October '63 mark. And Clapton went on to the Blues Breakers after that.
Yes.
The Blues Breakers is, well, I wouldn't say littered with, but there's a long line of illustrious guitarists who have like Peter Green, who were revered inside the guitarist and the blues R&B kind of world, but aren't really that widely known outside. And it was probably the Yardbirds that popularised Eric Clapton. Maybe his career might have been different without the Yardbirds and the Crawdaddy. Interesting to ponder on.
Yes, I mean, indeed. I mean, I actually never saw the Yardbirds with Top, but I did actually see them with Eric.
Sorry, Mike. Did you actually see them at the Crawdaddy Club?
No, I never saw them at the Crawdaddy. I saw them at the Marquee, right. And I think it was every Tuesday evening. I think they had a residency there at one time. And to be honest, I was absolutely mesmerised by Clapton. He had he's a great guitarist, but there was a certain aura about him. So I think even if he hadn't actually joined the Yardbirds, I think he would have made it big time. Although what I'm taught from quite a few musicians of that era was that Clapton was more of a technician. He practiced and practiced and practiced. He didn't have the same kind of feel as some of the other guys. Top, for example, Top plays with a lot of feel. But he was a very, very hard-working guy. He just practiced, and he became a fabulous technician.
Absolutely. And it was shortly after he joined, of course, that Giorgio recorded the Yardbirds with young Eric Clapton and Sonny Boy Williamson. And the album came out shortly after that. Because he was quite a producer, as well as his many other talents. I mean, he went on to produce an awful lot of people.
Yes, I mean, he became very interested in more sort of avant-garde stuff a little bit later on. You discussed this before, but when he moved to the States, he got involved in the avant-garde music scene over there, and I don't know that much about him after he left the UK. But there's a guy who came and made a film actually at the Crawdaddy, which he took over to Giorgio. So I learnt a little bit more about him from this guy, John Sadler, his name is. It's interesting, I asked John what Giorgio's reaction was when he told him that I'd revived the Crawdaddy. And his initial reaction was that he wasn't actually altogether happy about it. However, when John told him that I'd given him credit all through, and I always mentioned his name, then he was quite cool about it. He was very happy. That is, I'm carrying on his legacy, really.
Is he still around, Giorgio?
No, unfortunately, he died last year, sadly, and that's why we had this evening in his remembrance.
But he never actually got to see the Crawdaddy Club again. Is that?
No, sadly not. It would have been amazing if we could have got him there. But he was already by the time I met John, which was about 4 years ago. Giorgio was already not in terribly good health, so obviously he wasn't coming over. But interesting, you mentioned Harry Pendleton. He is still around, and he's in his 90s.
Right.
I met him a couple of years ago, and he actually had his 90th birthday party at the Richmond Athletic Ground at the Crawdaddy, in the same room, and they had his family organisers had lots of posters around of the Richmond Jazz and Blues Festival, which actually originated there at the rugby ground, and Mr. Pendleton was the one who actually started that.
Who played at his party? Anyone?
I don't think it was any music. I think it was just a sit down thing with mostly family. only found out about this after the guys that run the place told me. About several months later, I discovered that. But I did actually meet him because there was his talk by Richmond music. Well, he was actually not just music, a Richmond historian who did a presentation about the Richmond Jazz and Blues Festival. And Mr. Pendleton and his wife and son were there. And I introduced myself to him. Very, very nice, very, very gentle man. But I mean, he's already 90 by the time I met him. Still in good health.
Brilliant, lovely. I'll tell you what we do. We were talking about the Yardbirds there and the Clapton and all that lot.
Absolutely.
Is perhaps their obvious track, I suppose, is it?
Well, the reason I chose Shapes of Things was it was the last track that Giorgio produced for the Yardbirds. He actually produced all of the singles up until that point. And the B-side of this, You're a Better Man Than I, and I couldn't decide which one. I eventually plumped for Shapes of Things.
You're listening to me, Dave Roberts, and the wonderful Meridian 107 FM. I've got Derek Shelmerdine on the other side of the desk, and I've got Mr. Mike Rivers, who's the current owner. And obviously, by the sounds of things, doing a fantastic job down at the Crawdaddy Club.
Absolutely.
And
Thank you, Dave.
from back in the day, this is the Yardbirds and The Shape of Things.
Just teach me to despise. Will time make man more wise? Here, within my lonely frame, my eyes just hurt my brain, but will it seem the same? Come tomorrow, will I be older? Come tomorrow, maybe a soldier. Come tomorrow, may I be bolder than today. Now the trees are almost green, but will they still be seen when time and tide have been? Forward to your passing hands, please don't destroy these lands, don't make them desert sands. Come tomorrow, will I be older? Come tomorrow, maybe a soldier. Come tomorrow, may I be bolder than today.
Absolutely wonderful stuff there from the Yardbirds, of course, and The Shape of Things. Derek, the Crawdaddy Club, it was obviously so influential, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. But by the time we get to 1965, the sort of summer of 65, both the Crawdaddys closed. The Richmond Crawdaddy closed in the July, and the Croydon Crawdaddy, which by then was actually called the Star, was closed that September.
Did the Stones, did they play at the Croydon one?
I would imagine so. Yeah.
So they were on a par with each other.
The Yardbirds did, because one of the things I wanted to do was, since they were the resident band at Richmond, I guess that they would play one of the earliest gigs at the Star, possibly the opening one. And that gig I mentioned earlier was the first reference I could find. So the Star in Croydon opened around the same, well, I think very shortly after the Richmond one closed. But certainly Gomelsky did not go off and write a book or anything. One of the things he did in, around the time the Crawdaddies were closing, he formed Steam Packet, one of those bands that could very easily be called a supergroup. When you consider
they certainly would be today, wouldn't
Oh,
they? But of course, they're made up
of
of unknown people at the time.
Yeah. Well, Long John Baldry and Rod Stewart had just come from the Hoochie Coochie Men. They just recently folded. And Brian Auger, who very much another one with these guys with a very, very sophisticated jazz background. He was there in there with Julie Driscoll, who I think I read somewhere. Julie Driscoll was actually the Yardbirds fan club secretary. I think that's how she became involved, and this lady has a terrific voice. And they all got together with Mickey Waller. They never actually technically cut any records, though Giorgio had a habit of recording anything. If he was there, obviously the front desk has the ability to record what the band are doing. So he was a bit like Frank Zappa, and I think recorded just about everything that moved. But they never had any official records, because the problem was they came from different directions. They all had different recording contracts. They weren't together very long, but the reports of live performances were pretty impressive. And then around 66, he decided that he'd form the Marmalade record label. And the first one was by a band called the Roaring Sixties, We Love the Pirates. And this is the days before Radio 1. This is the days when there was almost no pop music on the radio, apart from Saturday Club, Pick of the Pops, and a very odd hour or two Oasis amongst the Mantovani. And that was actually a John Carter, Ken Lewis song, and they were the guys who had been the Ivy League.
Mike,
Yeah,
do you ever get any hankerings to sort of grab any of these people who are still around, say for instance Julie Driscoll, and get them down to the club today?
Well, I do try when I do come across them. I always do invite them. I'm not, to be honest, I'm not sure of Julie Driscoll, what she's doing, if she's still around. But, I remember those days very well. The Steam Packet, again, I saw them down at the Marquee. And actually, I always remember seeing Rod Stewart for the first time when Long John Baldry introduced him. And in those days, of course, all the musicians were pretty scruffily dressed. And Long John Baldry, he was a bit of an exception. And then, of course, he introduced Rod the Mod Stewart, who came on in a white suit, which was quite extraordinary for those days.
I mean, Long John was always quite a presentable guy, wasn't he?
Yeah,
whenever you saw him, he always had a good suit on, didn't he?
Absolutely. He always looked immaculate, and he was a bit of he spoke terribly well. I did actually meet him, and he was an extremely charming man.
And about 6'7" or something, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was very, very tall. I'm not quite sure quite, but he was very tall. And of course, he had a difficult time really, because he was gay, and in those days, being gay, openly gay, really wasn't accepted.
It was illegal.
Everybody knew he was gay, but he was never kind of made public, really. And for me, he was probably, to me, at that period, was the best white blues singer. He's the most amazing voice, absolutely fabulous blues voice.
Yeah. Well, he was from Lexis Corner, wasn't he? Cyril Davis background. A heck of a pedigree.
Absolutely amazing. I mean, we're very, very fortunate to have experienced, we lived through that era. Dave, I think you're a bit too young for that, aren't you?
I was born in '58, so I guess I was 5, 6 when all this was happening. So I was only, just getting whatever was coming through on the radio. I've got 2 older sisters who did throw a lot of sort of like the Small Faces and Otis Redding my way, even at that age. But certainly, I would never have gone out to these clubs. Which is a shame.
Absolutely,
it's a shame, But hey,
you've got to be born sometime.
I have people coming to the club. Some. I mean, the majority of people are my sort of era and people that frequented the club back in the day. My wife was one of the people. She used to go there in the 60s when she was was very young. But when we do get some younger folk come in and they say, "Oh my God, this is absolutely amazing," and you're so lucky to have lived through that era. You're very, very fortunate, and I think we're very, very fortunate.
So what was the inspiration in 2011 to actually bring the Crawdaddy back to life, Mike?
My initial plan was to revive the Richmond Jazz and Blues Festival, and I had to raise quite a substantial amount of money to make it possible. I raised about 50 grand, and I did actually find a potential sponsor who was happy to put up half the money. I couldn't find another one, so I couldn't actually raise the money. But I sat down with a coffee with this guy, and it's a sort of throwaway line. He said, "Have you thought about reviving the Crawdaddy Club?" And I said, frankly, actually, I hadn't, because I was still focusing on trying to raise the money to get the festival off the ground. But I came to a realization that it wasn't going to happen, and I spoke to my wife, who was a regular, and she thought it was a good idea. I took a couple of musicians down to have a look. Jeff Grange from the Blue Bishops came along with me, and we thought the guys thought it was a really good idea. We had a word with the owners, who agreed to us doing a trial. And initially we just did bi-monthly gigs, and it grew and grew, and we'd do once a month, and I'm quite happy with that. We have a good audience. We always have fantastic music. We always have fantastic music.
So you're on once a week
wants
now,
to come
aren't
and
you?
play there.
You're on once a week now, aren't you, Mike?
No, just still keeping to once a month.
Okay.
Which causes a little bit of a difficulty, because I'm contacted several times a week by musicians and bands who want to come and play the Crawdaddy.
Is it always the same Friday of every month, like the last Friday?
No,
or
it's
something?
not always the same Friday, because essentially the venue now is the members' bar of Richmond Rugby and London Scottish, and so the room isn't always available if there's a match on. So I have to sort of sit down.
You just have to do it when it fits in, I guess.
And fit it in as and when.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of, it's not that much of an issue. But what I also try and do is never to clash with the Il Pie Club. They do fortnightly gigs on a Thursday, so I try and always to do it on a week when they haven't got anything on.
It sounds like a great night. I really must, because I'm about an hour away from Richmond, so I mean, it must come down. I must come down.
Yeah, please do. I mean,
it must come down.
This Friday, actually, tomorrow, we've really got a great gig on with Will Johns, who actually is the nephew of Eric Clapton.
Yes, I was reading you on your website. He looks good, doesn't he?
Yeah, are they always,
what lineup he's got as well. He's got Jasmine Rogers, who's the daughter of Paul. He's got Malcolm Bruce, who's the son of Jack.
Sounds like they know what they're doing, doesn't it?
Yeah, they know what they're doing. And Will is a great performer. He's done the Crawdaddy before. And that's just going back to what you were talking about earlier. What Derek was saying, that in the 80s, the club was actually revived again back at the Station Hotel, which actually by then was called the Bull and Bush. And Will actually revived the club there. I can't remember exactly. I think it was 85 to 86. And then Ian McHugh took over as well. I think he ran it for a year. Ian's a very good musician himself, and he's got a radio show too. So it's very interesting now, because these guys have all become mates. So it's a lot of fun.
Nice close-knit community. Are they mostly or all blues R&B based bands that play there now, Mike?
We try and keep it to blues and rhythm and blues and rock blues, but we have had soul, and we had probably, oddly enough, the two most successful evenings had was with an artist called Joe Harmon, who's making quite a name for herself now. She just recorded last year. She recorded an album in Nashville, and she's not really. I wouldn't call her a blues singer, despite the fact that she won the Female Blues Singer of the Year was awarded by the British Blues Awards. She's not a blues singer. She's more of a soul singer and more kind of Americana and that kind of stuff. You can't, but oddly enough, that was actually the most successful evening. We sold out. I limited to 200. I want everybody to have a good experience. So although we have capacity for 250, I limited to 200.
Mike, I can't believe it, but the time has absolutely whizzed by and caught us up. Thanks so much for joining us on the phone.
Well, thanks,
David. It's been fantastic
to talk to you,
to hear your voice.
I hope to see you and Derek sometime.
I'll tell you what I'll do is I'll have a look on the website and we'll see when you're doing something next. I'll give you a ring.
Okay, that'd be lovely.
Brilliant. Mike?
Okay, thank you very much, Dave.
Thank you so much.
Mate.
Cheers. Bye, Derek. Bye.
Derek, that's fantastic to have Mike on the phone there like that.
Yeah,
And,
great guy, great club, and it's great to see such a club back, headed in the right direction again.
Yeah.
Now Julie Driscoll, Marmalade label.
Yeah, brilliant.
If your memory serves you well.
If your memory serves you well, a bit of Bob Dylan. Taking us up to the 9 o'clock news. Don't forget, Derek will be back again after the 10 o'clock news, and we'll be doing what happened this day, around January, over the years. So stick with us. Here's a bit of Julie Driscoll.
With another tale to tell, but you know that we shall meet again if your memory serves you well. Wheels on fire, rolling down the road. There's no if I'm not next of kin, this wheel shall explode. Your memory serves you well. I was gonna confiscate my lace and wrap it up in a sailor's knot and hide it in your case. If I knew for sure that it was yours, but it was oh so hard to tell. And you know that we shall meet again if your memory serves you well. Wheels on fire, rolling down the road. There's no if I'm not next of kin, this wheel shall explode. If your memory serves you well, you'll remember you're the one that called on me to call out men to give you your favors down. And after every plan had failed and there was nothing more to tell, you knew that we would meet again if your memory serves you well. This wheel's on fire, rolling down the road. There's no
From Lingfield to Forest Row, this is 107 Meridian FM.